Good morning for those who are tuning in the US, and good evening for those who are tuning in the UK. Thank you for joining Partnerize's and PerformanceIN's webinar today on 7 ways to drive measurable revenue with influencers today, where we'll be discussing actionable insights to identify and activate the right influencers to drive your brand this holiday season, as well as ROI. My name is Mustafa Mira, Senior Digital Journalist here at PerformanceIN, who will be moderating today's session. And we've got a really exciting lineup with you with 2 fantastic speakers, which I'm going to introduce to you now and sort of just talk through a little bit on some of the topics we'll be discussing. And just a couple of house rules before we kick off. So we're really excited to have 2 great speakers with us today. So we're joined by Nancy Rothman, VP of Marketing at one of the industry's leading influence marketing platforms, Sideqik, and also Charlie Calabrese, VP Operations at Partnerize, as the both of them will be going through couple of areas to kind of utilize one of the growing channels right now, which is influence marketing, and also just preparing for the holiday season and how you could utilize your brand and increase your ROI while working with influencers. So as I mentioned, 7 ways to drive measurable revenue, but we will be I'm just going to tease you a couple of areas that will be touched on throughout the session. I'm sure Nancy and Charlie will be going these in more detail. So just what we're going to go over is how to identify and activate the right influencers to drive ROI for your brand, how to leverage your existing community as influencers, which metrics to track with your influence marketing attribution, and lastly, how using a pay-for-performance model for influence marketing can benefit both parties. So thank you, Nancy and Charlie, for taking the time today to talk through this exciting session. Just a couple of house rules before we kick off and begin. So a couple more house rules. It's just attendees. So those who are listening in, if you want to submit any questions you'd like to answer, for Nancy and Charlie to answer throughout the session, we will be leaving 10 minutes at the end to go through any questions you may have. But feel free to enter your questions in the chat box below, and also the Q&A section, and we'll do our best to answer those questions throughout the session. And as I mentioned, so we'll leave 5-10 minutes at the end to any interviews, questions you would like to answer. But this session will sort of roughly run sort of between 30 to 45 minutes. So without further ado, I will hand over things to Charlie and Nancy to kick off the session.
So thanks everybody for joining us today. And thanks to PerformanceIN for making the time. Like, this is a great opportunity. I've had the chance to spend some time with Nancy and learn from her, and I'm so thankful to have that chance. It's great to know that there are like-minded people in the industry, not even when we're not even in the same industry, sort of, but we are both in marketing. And so just to give some background on me, just a little bit, my background is in digital marketing for sure, and for the past 10 or 12 years, I've really been focused on the affiliate and performance space. So my background and what I'll talk a little bit about today is my experience in that world. And then Nancy, what about you? Just a little bit?
Yeah, similar. I've spent the bulk of my career in digital marketing and with a heavy focus in social media, actually. And then over the last 5 years or so, really looking at the influencer segment as we've seen that just explode.
Yeah, to say the least, right? Like,
right.
So it's a great area to be in right now. There's so much like change and cool stuff happening. So I thought, the first question we'd start with is the simplest one, right? Like, how do you identify the right partners to work with? What, if you're a brand and how do you guys at Sideqik really focus on that, or how do you identify those people?
Sure. So we work with a ton of different clients, different brands that span industries, different sizes. And one of the things that is common amongst all of them is how they find influencers. And one of the things that we talk a lot about is authenticity and really finding alignment with your influencers. And kind of a side note from there, the way that we define influencers also a little bit unique, I think, in kind of how we're seeing different brands adopt. An influencer isn't really just someone who is creating content on social media or someone who has a trillion followers like a Jenner or Kardashian. An influencer is really someone who has influence over your brand. That could be affiliates, like what you guys work with on Partnerize. It can be any partner, really. Your sponsors, anyone who represents your brand, employees even. So influencer really captures a really large part of your community. It's not just a one size fits all. But when you are looking for influencers or people to partner with, you really have to find people who live and breathe your brand values, to really start to hone in on that authenticity. The thing that makes influencer marketing so great is having an authentic connection with your community, whether that is through your community or your brand following. So making sure that your influencers not only align with who your brand is, but also align with the audience that you're trying to reach. So a lot of the metrics that our brands look at are, brand affinity, the audience demographics of each partner that they work with, to make sure that they're reaching the right people through their influencers.
And I'd say on our side, it's so similar to what you're saying. It's as much as, we talk about partnerships and as a marketing software, like we're tracking things, right? We're tracking clicks, we're tracking transactions, like that's our bread and butter, right? But it's so much more an influencer about the relationship than it is about being transactional, right? Like you don't want to go and find someone and just kind of grab them out of the air and say, oh, you really need to find someone that aligns well with your intended audience, but also, so like the demographics thereof, but also kind of aligns well with your brand. So the last thing you want to do is be somebody who's very conscious of the environment and then have somebody who's just throwing trash wherever, you know what I mean? Like you want to be very conscious of those things. And I think you're right. Size in terms of the world of influencer has changed dramatically. I think, if you look a few years back, even more than a few years back, like celebrity was influencer, right? So Kim Kardashian just happens to be the one everybody jumps to, right? With her 200 million followers, whatever craziness it is. But celebrities have always been, athletes have always been like a voice for brands. They've always been influencers, which is when we talk about influencer has been around a long time. It's just only now become very digital and platform based, and people are recognizing the value. But I think you're totally right when you start to say, it's not necessarily the people with 200 million, it's the people with 10,000, because of those 10,000 every day going and looking for what this person has posted. It's how engaged are the people that follow you. And I just think that's the way that a smart brand pursues people. Sorry, please. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love what you just said about the transactional relationship. I think the biggest shift that we're seeing when you're identifying partners to work with in any space is looking for those people who will actually advocate for your brand. I think a couple of years ago, it was easy to find someone that had a huge following and maybe appear to align with your brand. You throw them a few $1,000s and they post something. And then you kind of just wash your hands with it and you go away. But as the influencer group of creators has kind of come up and they're starting to be their own people and have their own notoriety, they also can come with baggage like scandal. And we've seen, our parents.
So
yeah.
And the other thing to think about there, transactional versus relationship building, right? Like influencers, like you said, they're getting so much more, like they're growing their business, like, and influence is their business. And the last thing that they want to do is come across as fake, right? Like they value what they say because they want their audience to see them as authentic. And when it's not, they lose followers. Surfboards when you've never done anything outdoors, you know what I mean? Like it's a bad fit. So I think that's actually an interesting transition to kind of like when we talk about like tracking, when we talk about like working with that influencer, like are there meaningful ways in your mind to track performance of the influencer? What are those metrics? And like, how do you manage expectations effectively with an influencer?
We get this question all the time, and it's something that I think every marketer struggles with just in general is tracking and attribution and all of those fun things that are just kind of a black box a lot of the time.
They're the worst.
The worst. And, when we think about influencer success, it really starts at the very beginning when you're creating the campaign brief or setting up the expectations for the whole campaign and not necessarily just the influencer, and making sure that those align with what you're asking of that partner, that influencer, that whoever is essentially becoming a stakeholder in your company and your brand. I think for a really long time, influencer was used as an awareness play, and you could reach a lot of people at one time and also get the credibility of whatever influencer or creator you're working with. And at the time, the metrics were earned media value, understanding what the impressions were, what the reach was of that content. And while a lot of those metrics are still really important and help build the ROI case for an awareness campaign, something that we're starting to see a lot more of is capturing more of the activity at the bottom of the funnel. So when you think of e-commerce brands and retail brands and the direct-to-consumer brands that are popping up, 10 an hour, especially right now where we're having everything shipped to the door, a lot of those types of brands are looking for influencers that are actually going to convert customers and actually get people to take action. So that's a really interesting evolution that we're starting to see on our end in terms of the expectations that brands have of the influencers. And it's really just important to make sure that your campaign goals are well communicated to your influencer and you can kind of structure the relationship around that.
Yeah, and what I would say is that's true of every marketing campaign I've ever worked on, whether it's influencer or not. It's know your goals for this campaign, know the values of your business, and make sure that they're communicated well. I think those things don't change, whether it's influencer or retargeting or whatever it might be. But what I would say here is, like you said, things are moving a little bit. And if you go, if you're a history nerd, like I am, when internet marketing first started, it was all about impression because that was the only thing they thought they could track, right? Okay, it went out just like it would in a newspaper. And that's the forum they understood. And I think that's true when influencer marketing really started. It was, let's just focus on the impression, which is why they chase celebrity, right? I mean, they've got 10 million followers. Here's 10 million eyeballs, hopefully. But the same way, just general digital marketing has moved from impression to click to conversion, where you can really see the value. I think that's true of influencer as well. But what it does is it opens some opportunities for you to work with people because it can be lower cost if they don't perform. But I think if you talked to an influencer, they'd say, I'm creating something. I'm taking time. So I think there's and it's, again, something we can talk about a little bit later, but while it's moving to CPA or getting somebody engaged, signed up, whatever it might be, influencers are also looking to make sure there's a balance for them.
Of course. Yeah. And I think it's going to vary by brand as well. So even though we're seeing this, evolution and this kind of starting to bubble up, I don't think that the awareness play will ever necessarily go away. And I was actually talking to an influencer recently who, we were just kind of talking about some of the pain points that she has when working with some brands, and she's a DIY influencer. And so she's working with brands like Lowe's and some paint brands. And, the hardest part is negotiating sometimes because there is the performance part of it, but then there's also the time spent where she's building a door frame. That takes time, that takes money. So yeah, there's definitely a bit of that too.
And I think I don't think it's unfounded. I just think there has to be this middle ground, right? And
yeah,
it depends on what your goals are as a brand. It may not be that that's a good fit for you, but I think when you look at it, you have to understand your goals. If it's brand recognition, that's one thing. If it's trying to drive conversion of some kind, that's completely different. you know, and as you talk about like what the influencers are looking for, I know a lot of brands they don't have the experience in influencer that they may have in other channels. So, you know, is there value in creating like exclusive opportunities and content for your influencers, or having them create exclusive content? Like, what's the real value play in that?
Oh yeah, we see this all the time. You know, especially with brands that maybe have a ton of influencers. The one that comes to mind for me is Sugar Bear Hair. And I don't know if it's because I follow all the Kardashians, but they're everywhere on my feed. But it doesn't necessarily make me want to buy it or interact, because it's just the same image over and over and over again.
Right.
And so one of the things that that we've seen some of our clients be successful with is, again, creating a real partnership with the influencer and creating experiences and interactions that are meaningful to the influencer's audience as well. You know, we have a regional clothing retailer. They have like 20 stores on the East Coast. And when they were opening new stores, they would partner with local influencers in that area who could come into the store for the opening or come in a few days before and provide kind of a behind the scenes look at what the store looked like, what the in-store experience was. And that created value for the influencer too, because they were also getting something that nobody else got. And it was very exclusive for them. So you're building value on value with the influencer, and then they'll pass that value on to their audience who maybe wants to take part in that store opening, or whatever the case may be. So, you know, just creating opportunities where your influencer can feel like they're getting something of value and not just passing out a flyer that, you know, 30 other people are also passing out.
Yeah. Because the last thing an influencer wants is to kind of look like a carbon copy of another, right? So
exactly,
that individuality is so important in the space. And I would say if you use that logic and you just take it like a step further, it's like you're giving the influencer a stake in your business, right?
Yes.
Like you're saying like, look, I'm relying on you, right? I need you for this. And I think there's something to be said for that. I think influencers who really give a care, almost slipped.
Almost did
it. Influencers who really care are going to be influencers who want that stake, who want to take on that responsibility. And I think the ones that I've seen perform best on programs are the ones that do shown that respect, shown that level of responsibility. But I think it's also worth noting, like, when you talk about like those, like a brand like that, right? Who cares what brand it is, right? There's communities that are like, they've bought into the brand before they ever got in contact or started doing business with the brand, right? The one that always pops up in my mind is Gymshark. I don't know if you know them, but like Gymshark is like, they do all these amazing athletic clothes and very cool, right? But like, all of these people were bought into the brand beforehand, right? Another one that comes to mind is like Pure Vita. Like, they do a lot of like jewelry and things like that. And it's amazing that all of their people, they loved the brand to begin with. So it was like they had a personal stake before they even had a relationship. We have a question come in about payouts. You know, does it need to be upfront or does it need to be paid? Do you mind if we kind of jump to that?
Yeah.
Like, a really interesting question. I would say that there's a lot of different models that you can use, and they each have their own strengths and weaknesses. But Nancy, you know, to be honest, you do this a lot more. Any thoughts on just payout models that seem to be working, or how the payout models have changed? The question specifically is, are influencers open to like a CPS payout, or does it still need to be all up front? And I'll let you take it to start, but yeah.
Sure. So I don't think that there's a one size fits all for the paying out or compensating your influencers or your creators or whoever you're partnering with. You know, we've seen it in so many different varieties. There's the standard way that I think everyone's most familiar with is you pay a creator to create content for you. And that's based on, whatever their rate card is. Every creator is going to be different. And you kind of pay it as a one-time sponsorship.
I love the influencers are to the point now where they have like rate cards.
Rate cards. A lot of them have agents.
Yeah, the world is changing. Yeah.
It's different. Yeah. Another model that we see is the combination where you pay for the content creation up front, but then there's also a variable piece at the end, similar to an affiliate model, where they're getting a commission on, products that they're able to sell in addition to the content they're creating. Another one that we see quite often is actually just product swaps.
Yeah.
In the example that I shared a second ago with the retail store that invited influencers into their store, they actually gave their influencers gift cards. They gave them a $500 gift card.
Yeah, that's very popular right now. We've seen that. Yeah.
And not only did it give the influencers product and value in that way, but what they were able to shop for in the store was also unique content, and they were able to show off what they purchased or give a product review. We have another client, Death Wish Coffee, who had an e-commerce store, and they identified some influencers who aligned with their values, people who were into workouts and kind of like rugged folks who needed a caffeine boost. And they just surprised and delight and sent their new product to these influencers, and just got incredible earned media value just by sending a care package out to these folks. And it was not paid at all. It was just the $20 cost of shipping a case of coffee.
And I think just to kind of to piggyback on what you're saying, and I hate that term, piggyback, sorry. Marketing guy, well done, marketing guy. I would say, initially it was all about getting paid up front or the exchange of goods, right? So like, I will give you my goods and I want you to photograph them, video them, whatever it might be, right? And I think it's changing, right? I think a lot more influencers are open to the idea of, potentially some money up front to make sure that their costs are covered. Like you said, if I got to go paint a door or buy a door to paint the door, I need a little bit of money up front. Right? Or I need your product. But I do think a smart influencer sees that there's a back end opportunity to make recurring revenue. And I do think that's a reality. I think that's important. I can say in our space, we also recognize that the funnel can be quite long, right? From the time someone first sees something to the time someone actually goes and buys something. So, we've also seen some advertisers implement like a click-based payment. So every time clicks are occurring, they maybe a partner gets 2 or 3 cents, but that adds up over time if they've got a good. My only commentary on that would be very careful with a click-based model, because a click-based model is really easy to have fraud occur, and the reality is fraud occurs everywhere in marketing. So we just have to be careful with that. Out of curiosity, like, what kind of models have been the most recent for when we talk about the size of an influencer? Like, there's the celebrity, there's kind of the micro, there's the nano, like different sized publishers. Do you think the payment models relate to like their experience and their size, or is it really independent of that?
A lot of the times, especially when it's a payment for them to actually do something like creating content, it is a set fee based on what their reach might be, what they have, considered what their cost is going to be by hour. It's just like hiring a freelancer or a contractor to create content. They have, whatever their rate is going to be. But I just got another idea, another example when it comes to payment. One of the things that some brands will do is take the people that are already engaged in their brand and use them as influencers. So your loyal customers, your fans that already love you, and create something like an ambassador program where you're paying them in exclusive content. There's no monetary payment. You're providing them value in a different way. So I think one of the things that you can think about when you're working with influencers is that compensation isn't necessarily monetary. It can just be value. Right. In a different sense.
Well, and I guess that's really another interesting question when you start to talk about finding influencers and potentially the community that exists around your brand, like, how do you leverage those folks, right? Like, or you know, we've certainly heard the term brand ambassador like before, right? Like, there are some people that actually have brand ambassador programs, but like, what is the thought of leveraging those people, right? Like how do you pursue that?
Well, when you have, you know, when certain brands have reached, you know, a certain point of equity, they kind of come to you. You don't really have to go looking for them.
Right.
You know, one of the ambassador programs that came out, I think last year, that was really big was the Sephora Squad. And people are really passionate about their makeup. You know, there's a whole segment of beauty influencers, but then there's, you know, I know we were just talking about our skincare regimen earlier. Missed it for this one. Yeah, but you have these people that are really passionate already. And then, you know, in addition to that, they're passionate about your brand. So just inviting people to join a program. I think for theirs, you have a form online. If you're interested, you go in. I saw another one for Bye Bye Baby. They sent an email blast to all of their email subscribers and just ask people to be an ambassador. And they get thousands of submissions, and it's people who want to talk about their products and talk about the experience. And there's no compensation there at all. You know, another brand that comes to mind is Lululemon. Like, we're all wearing those leggings every day right now. I know you are, Charlie.
Yes, I love my Lulu. Totally true.
And, you know, they've got their own group, and they have a really strong community around fitness and the sweat life. And, you know, those people exist already. So I think when you have a larger brand like that, it's super easy. And one of the things that I did want to touch on there as well is, just because you are not a Sephora or a Lululemon doesn't necessarily mean you can't do the same thing. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and we have a huge food community. And you really saw them come out recently with, you know, COVID and a lot of restaurants having to shut down. And you see people advocate for their favorite restaurants or their favorite restaurant groups, their favorite mom and pops. Like, you have those ambassadors that you really don't have to do a ton of work to find, as long as you're kind of putting in the work to build that community in the front end.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And the only thing that I would add to that, if there are brands, you know, if our participants are brands, I don't think the size of your brand is indicative of can you have brand ambassadors. But I will say it is easier to have brand ambassadors in certain verticals, or at least that's been my experience. At least that's what I've seen, right? So, you know, some of the folks you mentioned, retail, lifestyle, right? I think realistically, there are verticals that brand ambassador plays better too, just because it's easier to have a material, right? It's going to be really hard for H&R Block to be like, hey, you want to be a brand ambassador for our tax software? Like, it's a little harder than, say, you're a Lululemon or an Adidas or a Nike, right? But I do totally agree that if you can find a group of individuals that is already dedicated to your product, and it just comes across so much more authentic, you're going to get better results. Which also leads to an interesting concept. How do you empower that content, right? How do you get your audience to take action? Like, what's in the world of influencer, it's different, right? It's you have to convince people to really buy into a brand. So are there key takeaways? Are there key things that an influencer should consider? Are there key things that the brands should consider when they're talking about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, any marketer has heard, I want the results tomorrow. How is this doing? The thing you launched 20 minutes ago, how's it doing? Yeah. And you want immediate impact on a lot of the campaigns. And I think there is some expectation management here with influencers. You know, we talked about authenticity a little bit ago and how important it is to have influencers who can authentically connect with people. And, you know, that's, you know, really where your results are going to be. And with a lot of the work that influencers are doing, a lot of the content is really empowering very innately. It's empowering people to take an action. It's empowering people to try something new. Maybe it's a food influencer who's empowering you to try a new recipe you don't cook, but you know what, this account just made me feel like I could. Or a DIYer. I just, this person just made a mailbox. I could totally make a mailbox now. So they're putting in a lot of the work on the front end to create that.
Yeah.
You can't do that?
Couldn't build a mailbox. There's no chance. There's no chance.
I'll give you some TikTokers to follow.
Thank you. Love the TikTok. Love the TikTok.
So they're creating content that empowers people already. So you're really trying to play off of that relationship that's existing versus giving them a promo code on immediately and telling them that they need to go and push this product. Being able to create content that supports the action that you're trying to get the consumer to take is really important and really valuable with influencers and influencer marketing in general.
I totally agree. And, I'll take it a step back from influencer and I'll play it just to marketing in general, right? If there's no call to action, you're not going to get the results you want. So if you're an influencer or if you're a brand, push that call to action, right? And one of the things that you want to keep in mind is that call to action is different on every platform, right? So some platforms will allow you to put vanity links. Some platforms will allow you to put things into your profile. Some people have like the swipe up. Some people have like your stories, whatever it might be. It's just really important when you're a brand to keep in mind, depending on the platform you're working with, that is how you're going to get that call to action to occur. And I think that's the best way to start to think about empowerment is to say, if you want an action to occur, make sure you're working with people that can make it occur, have the experience to make it occur, understand how important those links are. And when you create your proposal, make it clear what your expectations are. So I expect you to put this in your bio. I expect this to be on your profile, whatever it might be. Because if you don't, influencers don't know any better, and that will dictate in many cases the price, because no one's going to leave their bio link as your brand indefinitely if they can sell it to someone else. So you just have to be very conscious of that. We did get a question about, is it mainly through vanity codes? And vanity codes are a great way to do it if you're a retailer. Links, like if you're using an affiliate or a partnership platform, you put the links into those profiles. I would say, again, keep in mind, these things take time. Like influencers need time. And Nancy, I know you know that as well as anybody else. Like, how many times have you been asked to turn a campaign in like a day? And that's just not this world. Yeah, yesterday. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Love it. Yeah.
One of the things I want to add here, and this is something, more recent, I guess, and, I actually sat on a really great webinar a few days ago on this. Streaming, esports, gaming, that industry is also blowing up. I mean, it's been there forever, it feels like. But more recently now, I think marketers are starting to jump in on that and really understand the value of that audience. And it really validates the point you just made about how each channel is going to be different, and your strategy for each channel, not just your influencers, has to be unique to create that connection. One of the things that somebody mentioned was that streamers are already so digitally advanced and adopted to different things. If you drop in a promo code in the chat for a stream, it actually does significantly better than if you were to use the same promo code in a different channel, just because that audience is so connected with that streamer and already knows what to do with it. So yeah, that's something that we've definitely seen in that particular segment with.
And with us coming up on Q4, which for the retailers are just going to be, everybody expects to make half their money in the quarter, right? Mm-hmm. I think gaming is one of those spaces where you're going to see a lot of uptick for Q4. There are 2 new consoles that are supposed to be coming out in November. There's a ton of people talking about what the new games are going to be. And I know that the folks at Sideqik have done a great job in the gaming space, and you have a really nice breadth of influencers who are strong in that space. I think Q4 is going to see a lot of folks jumping on influencer, not only in gaming, but just across the board. There's so much budget right now that is going unspent because there aren't shows to go to, right? A booth at CES is $100,000 minimum. So you suddenly have $100,000 to spend. An influencer seems like an interesting channel. I think there's a lot of money that's going into the channel, and I think we're going to see that a lot in the holiday season.
Yeah, and a unintended tangent here on the gaming piece. I think one of the things that's really kind of a misconception with gaming is that you have to be in the gaming space to take advantage of streamers and gamers and people that have these huge audiences that are hyper engaged. Yeah. Something we've seen over the last maybe 2 years is a lot of non-endemic brands are really getting in on the streamer game. Like if you watch a stream, you've got State Farm and Gillette in the background, and they're sponsoring these players very similarly to the physical contact sports that we all know and love.
And
so it's
like Red Bull and Monster, who are now making drinks for gamers. You know what I mean? Like there's huge opportunity. You don't have to be in that space. You're right. But understanding their demographic is so important.
Just keeping it authentic is the number one rule to influencer marketing.
Yeah. I think the one thing that we often forget as we start to think about, as you dig into influencer, is it's not about inherently what they're talking about. It has to be authentic, but it can be tangential, right? It can be that you know that their folks are the right age group or they are the right demographic for your business. You don't have to go super direct. You can come in from the side of it. But as we talk about like things that are going on globally, I think something you brought up earlier is really interesting. This idea that you had people coming into shops, like the local play is something that I think a lot of people don't spend the time thinking about for influencers. So can you help everyone on the call understand the difference between like global versus local scope? Like is there a different strategy between the two?
Sure. I think you see this a lot more with really large big box retailers and large CPG companies who have this, really great reach that's, national, global, whatever the case may be. And they're trying to raise awareness and they're trying to generate interest for their brand on a global level. But at the same time, they have these local stores that they also have to activate to generate actual results and not just, an impression or reach. So I think that they definitely have to work hand in hand. And there's kind of a place within the influencer world for both of them. When you think about, we'll use Swiffer as an example. Everyone knows what a Swiffer is. But they have, a global audience. Everybody needs a Swiffer. So if they're working with influencers on a global level, it might just be an awareness play. It might just be influencers talking about the latest product or hacks or for how to use a Swiffer wipe. But then from a local level, they have retailers that have to actually sell the product. So on a local level, it, isn't an awareness KPI anymore. Maybe it's coupon redemptions. Maybe it's certain stores, tracking percentage of sales or whatever the case may be. And I think, going back to, I'll use Lululemon again as a really great example, because they have this global brand, but they also have to activate in their local markets where they have stores, and it's really disingenuous to just kind of have the same message go out to each of your stores when you're walking into a physical store. So being able to understand your community within each market and having influencers or partners that kind of align with that is super, super important.
And I think, when you think about stuff like that, regionality, even within a single country, right? Like in the US, right? The weather as the winter starts to come, it's going to be cold in the Northeast, right? But it's not necessarily going to be freezing in Texas and Southern California. So you do have to really think about what you're asking your influencer to do and what you're asking them to present, especially if you are trying to drive that local engagement. The only thing that you said that I would, kind of add to is, you know, do you also talk about smaller brands, right? Like it's, as you said earlier, there's so many brands popping up. It feels like every day we're learning about a new retailer, somebody starting their own business, starting their own jewelry, makeup, whatever it might be. And they may not be huge brands yet. They may not be those global brands, but they are looking to get people engaged with their brand. And if they're small, I do think that local engagement is a big deal, right? Like if you are starting a new makeup line, you're starting a new beverage line, a new food line, you want to get people in your community engaged so that you can get that initial buy-in. It's almost like a form of Kickstarter, right? Like it's almost like you're getting people to buy in these small stages and then move from there. So I do think there's some interesting ability to spend in influencer at a local level. And if I'm right, and I think I am, like with your platform, and again, I don't want to dive too deep, but like there are ways to target people that are influencers in a region. Is that right?
Yeah, you can, in our platform, you can search by city, state, country, language even, to find people who are going to connect with that. Yeah, so you can definitely search that way.
I've always thought the more, and it's something that our business takes into account, like the more data you have, the more effective you can be. And so like, we're those nerds. So it's nice to know we're not alone in this space. Yeah. So I don't have a ton of other questions, but we do have some questions that came up in the Q&A. So I thought maybe we'd try and respond to some of them if you're cool with that.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah. One of the questions from Jaron is authenticity and reliability are key to a successful, engaging influencer. But it seems many followers are also drawn to influencer lifestyle, but won't necessarily partake in the lifestyle themselves in real life, which I can relate to because I am not going to the gym right now. With that said, it seems the common misconception with influencer business model centers around the idea that the followers translate to sales. How do you target the passive audience and convert followers to revenue? And I think that's something that comes up a lot. Please, go ahead, Nancy. I'm sorry.
No, that is a huge misconception. And I don't necessarily think that influencer does translate to direct sales. Just like any other top of the funnel activity, when you're raising awareness, you're not necessarily tracking that all the way down to the sale. But I think that when you're looking at maybe a passive audience, like the person asked, you can engage them in a different way. So even if you have an audience and you're asking them to buy something or subscribe to something, like even if they're not going to take that final action, I think there are other actions within that consumer journey that you can really get them to engage with. So even if it's not an exact response, one of the things that I've seen people do is use influencers to build an email list. That's not a sale. You're not really asking for a ton from the consumer. It's just subscribe to our email list or follow us on another channel, maybe another channel that you're more engaged with. So I think there are different ways to engage people. That's not necessarily a sale. And those engagements are still incredibly valuable for your business.
I totally agree. And I'd almost take it a step further to say, if you're a brand, be smart about what influencer can really drive, right? Know your brand, know your buyers. Are they going to buy a $10,000 education or $20,000 education in e-learning from influencer? Probably not. But could you collect some email addresses, sign up to learn more, get people to follow? Totally. Other side of that, are you selling something that, is in a more reasonable price point? So like Starbucks used to come to the store and buy there, right? You can't track that inherently, right? Like Starbucks isn't going to give out a Charlie code and a Nancy code, right? Like they're going to try and get people in store. So you have to be really conscious of what you can get from an influencer or from influencer marketing. I don't see how you can not be smart enough in that regard. You just have to be really careful. One of the things and one of the questions that's here is, what about B2B? And I think that it actually is an interesting part of this conversation. You and I talked about this a little bit briefly yesterday, but thoughts on B2B and influencer?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a space for influencers in the B2B space. I think it's obviously not as obvious just because we're not selling makeup and shoes. But one of the initiatives that I have always really loved, I mean, being in B2B myself, is Microsoft. I think Microsoft does a really good job of evangelizing their technology and everything that they're doing. And, they have an actual, I think the program is actually called the Tech Evangelists. Like, they have a group of people that, talk about hardware, software, whatever they're developing. They talk about it pretty openly, and they use influencers to some degree to talk about what they're doing from their business perspective. One of the things that I think about when I think of B2B marketing in general is, even though it's B2B, you're still marketing to a human at the end of the day. That's still another person. It doesn't necessarily change how you talk to them. Yeah. So, excuse me. So, Robert Scoble and Guy Kawasaki, like there are influencers in that space. And, I guess you could call them the celebrities of B2B versus B2C.
And the one that pops up for me, Microsoft pops up for you. IBM actually pops up for me in the way that they are trying to push Big Blue and their AI technologies.
Mm-hmm.
They're asking a lot of nerds, right? Like, and I relate to that, right? To say, could your business do more, learn more, automate more with our technology? And I do think there's a B2B play, but I think, like you described, it narrows what influencers you can work with significantly, because there's a lot more B2C influencers than there ever will be B2B influencers. And I think in the world of B2B, in order to be an effective influencer, you really have to be considered an industry expert, right?
Yes.
When you talk about a Guy Kawasaki, right? One of the ones that Gary Vaynerchuk pops up in my head. He's somebody who is telling people, go start businesses. Step back from your day-to-day and think about the ways that you could go and start a business. Let me help you in some cases. Let me give you some ideas. But you have to be seen as an expert, or B2B just doesn't work in my mind. In terms of just some other questions that have popped up, what are the most common mistakes? So this is a tough question. What are the most common mistakes you see brands make as they enter or scale in the influencer channel? I'm definitely leaving that to you to start, Nancy. Like, no question on you, buddy.
I think the most common mistake is treating influencer marketing as another box to check, and just treating it as something that they just kind of have to do and get it off their plate. And it's not something that they're really investing time and consideration into. And I think we're going to see that shift a lot more in, the coming months even. It's not going to take too long, I think, for that shift to happen. But people are just like, yeah, I need influencers because everyone says I need influencers,
Our director said, where are the influencers?
Where are the influencers? We need it.
Yeah.
And so people who don't think about it or don't frame it around how it impacts their business is definitely a misstep, and giving it more attention.
Yeah, and I think, some of the things you mentioned earlier that I would describe as the most common mistake: plan before you ever go and spend, right? Know your brand, know the demographics you're chasing, know the influencers that make sense or are already interested in your brand.
Yep.
And don't ask someone to turn around a campaign overnight. I mean, this isn't programmatic. And even in programmatic, it takes time for the algorithms to learn, right? How to best spend your dollar. You have to be smart. You have to give influencers time to build those things. If you rush it, you're going to see poor results. one of the things that it has come up as a question, but I'm going to reshape it a little bit. The question is, do we see influencers buying paid traffic to support specific campaigns? And I'll expand that a little bit and say beyond just campaigns, but to bump up their numbers, to make it look like they have more followers, more likes, things like that. So thoughts on that, Nancy?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to happen. I think, when you think about influencers, they're running their own business. They are their own brand. So if they are, if they have their own budget for driving traffic to their blog or their social channels or whatever the case may be, that's going to happen. So this is where data is really, really important, and understanding what that traffic means. If you have an influencer who's got, crazy traffic, what are their click-throughs? What's their time on site? What are the different metrics that can tell you more of the story? Yep. And then, I know that Partnerize does some fraud tracking on their end. So after you've been working with an influencer for a while, or a publisher even, I mean, publishers spend tons of money to get traffic on their sites too. It's really no different with influencers. Once you start working them, you really have to track the performance and see if there are any red flags that maybe you need to attend to and learn from.
Yeah. And my perspective on this is, if you've been in digital media long enough, there's always somebody trying to cheat. There's always somebody trying to cheat the system. And the best advice that I can give to any brand, whether someone's paying for traffic, you'll also see influencers be part of these like groups or like circles where they convince everyone to click on the things they post, and in exchange, they'll click and like everything that the other people post. There are a few key metrics that I would always look at. I'd look at growth numbers. So like, are numbers continuing to go up, or do you see these weird random spikes? Because that's someone buying traffic if you see this kind of crazy spike. The other thing I would keep in mind is, when you look at who's commenting, are you seeing the same people commenting all the time? Are you seeing just 3 or 4 people? Because what that means is that person doesn't have a truly engaged following. And I think that's what you're looking for in influencer marketing. You're looking for engagement, period, right? Whether that's somebody buying, somebody looking, someone liking. If you can't get quality, true engagement, then I don't think influencer may not be the right space for you. Would you sort of agree with that?
Completely agree with that. There's website traffic that I think that you're speaking to. And then on the social media side, it's more so people buying followers. So it's not necessarily traffic to your profile, but it could be buying followers or having a bunch of bots as you're following to inflate your reach. So there are tons of tools that can help you mitigate a lot of the risk there. Like in Sideqik, one of the features we have is called an authenticity score. So what we do is we're not looking just at the number of followers that an influencer has, but we're actually analyzing the posts that they have and the amount of engagement that they have with their audience to really determine if they're being authentic, because that's what the currency is for us right now. It's not necessarily following, it's how much they connect with their audience.
And I would say, if you can find partners like Sideqik or tools that are out there that can help educate you on the quality of the influencers you're going to work with before you engage them, that's the way to go. Like, make sure that the people you're partnering with are of a certain quality, right? You want them to be a high level if you're going to spend money with them. Just a few minutes left, so just a couple of questions. Do you anticipate any major changes to the influencer landscape in 2021? For those of you who are news junkies, TikTok was a huge, like, no one saw TikTok coming. No one saw TikTok being this thing that exploded and had hundreds of millions of users all at once. And now it has to be sold according to the US president. But it's a Chinese-backed company. So the country of China, the government of China is like, right, but there are rules. As of yesterday, it looks like Oracle. On a personal level, I would expect there to be some changes in terms of who's leading the pack and where people are posting to. I'm old, so TikTok isn't really my thing, right? Like, it's just not. I barely understand Instagram. I do, but Yeah, like I can't, right? I just can't do it. But I also know my nieces and nephews who are in their teenage years and some are younger, they love TikTok. They love singing along with a song or doing a dance that everybody else is doing. So I think there's going to be some changes in terms of where people are posting or who is posting to where. Any thoughts, Nancy?
Yeah, completely agree. You know, I think as we saw with TikTok, more networks are going to emerge. More are going to pop up. I mean, there's also Triller, who was #1 when TikTok, I think, was banned in India, maybe.
Yeah,
Or,
it was. Yeah, exactly right. Yep.
Or even when the news hit the US, I think Triller got a bump too. So I think that we're going to continue to see these different platforms and different mediums of content crop up. You know, one of the things that is becoming more apparent is that the younger generation, like you're thinking, not even like the preteens. I think before we would focus kind of on the high school age kids,
Yeah.
but the buying power in a household is really starting much younger at those preteens and even, you know, maybe even younger than that. They're the ones going to the stores. They're the ones who are watching content and wanting to buy things and telling mommy and daddy to get whatever. So the buying power is shifting. And I think that these networks are cropping up to kind of compensate for that a little bit. Like I feel like we don't talk about it a lot anymore, but Snapchat is a prime example. Yep. They're still huge, but they're really only huge with younger kids.
It's a certain community, right?
It's a certain community. And the same can be said with TikTok. It's a certain community. So I think as communities evolve, as people evolve, these networks kind of have to meet that demand to some degree. So it's going to continue to change. I think we'll see 5 more networks pop up in 2021 that will have to swerve and manage.
And I think, you know, the one big takeaway from that, in that we both agree that there's probably more networks coming. There's change, you know, there's going to be new entrants into the market. Keep in mind, one, who they target or who are their users. If you're a marketer, you need, or a brand specifically, you need to be very careful about who you're targeting and how. Don't spend a ton of money if what you're selling isn't something for kids, right? TikTok may not be the right, you know, maybe stick to a Facebook. And I would add to that, you know, be sensible. Not every one of these, we talked about it earlier, where can people put a code? Where can people put a link? So if you're looking for someone to jump out of that platform to your page, make sure that that platform allows it. Because for a long time, TikTok didn't.
Yep.
So you could only link to your Instagram. So you had to go from TikTok to Instagram, Instagram to the bio to the link. Be smart if you're going to spend money on new platforms. Make sure that they're capable.
And keep track of the evolution too. I mean, TikTok is, I think it was last week, there's a new integration with Teespring, which makes merch for influencers essentially, where they'll make their own t-shirts and you can buy it directly in TikTok. So like, I think that as much as we're watching the new ones pop up, we have to also watch the old ones and what they're doing to innovate. So you have to kind of have eyes on 30 different balls at one time.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that's the reality of like these marketplaces of like the new big marketing play. And I think influencer marketing has shown itself to be the place people are going to be spending the next couple of years. We're essentially at its time. Mustafa, we'll turn it back to you, sir.
Oh, no, thank you. No, thank you both. That was absolutely brilliant. I think you covered the whole spectrum of influencer marketing and why it's so valuable today. So no, brilliant insights. And yeah, thanks again, Nancy and Charlie, for going through the questions. And we had a flurry of questions, which was great as well. So thanks for sort of talking and answering those as well. No, thank you everyone for tuning in to today's session, and I hope you got a lot of key takeaways. I certainly did. If you got a lot of key takeaways that you can go ahead and implement to your practice prior to the holiday season, but more importantly 2021 as well, as the influencer channel space continues to thrive and innovate. So yeah, thank you to Nancy and Charlie again for taking part in this webinar and sharing their insight. And thank you to Partnerize and Sideqik as well. And yeah, just a quick little things before we go is there will be a recording of this session. So If you want to recap on any notes, or if, for those who didn't attend or would like to listen, like to tune into, there will be recording on PerformanceIN as well as Partnerize and Sideqik's platforms as well. And yeah, so yeah, so thanks again for taking part. And lastly, if you want to get in touch with Charlie and Nancy, you can do so. Oh, when the page loads, yeah, there we go. Yeah, so yeah, if you want to get in touch with Nancy or Charlie at all and answer any more questions that you may have that we haven't had a chance to go through today, feel free to contact them via their email addresses there. And yeah, so as I said, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you again to Nancy and Charlie. And yeah, we'll speak to you soon, and best of luck in planning for the holiday season.
Thank you all for the time. And Nancy, thank you for being so awesome. We really appreciate you spending time with us.
Thank you. I will talk to you guys later.